Good evening, everyone. I'm going to get started now. Nobody's shown up yet, but I will still complete this meeting through and go through the slides with you. I'm Professor Bamberg. I'm your instructor for ITI 680, and this course is called Self as a Critical Thinker. This is being recorded, and hopefully someone will show up. If not, we'll just get through it and then you can listen to it. So tonight's agenda is we're going to have some introductions. We're going to have some definitions related to critical thinking. We're going to talk about critical theory. And then we're going to go over a timeline of philosophers to develop the knowledge of the history of critical thinking theories. And finally, we're going to go on to a little bit about ChatGPT. And next week, we will be doing Eastern philosophy and Latin American philosophy. So we'll put in next week. All right. Excuse me. So I'm Professor Bamberg. I'm based in Palm Springs, and I have a multiple subjects teaching credential with physical science and math attachment. I got that through having a major in meteorology. And I have a master's in creative arts education from San Francisco State University, and my bachelor's was from Florida State University. I spent 14 years in the public schools. Most of the years were teaching second grade, but I have taught all the grades up through 6, including combination classes. So let's move on. So here's some definitions that you're required to know. First is critical thinking, and it's an objective analysis and evaluation. So those would be on Bloom's taxonomy, and we'll be getting to that in a few slides, but to see if I can find them, if that's what we cover today. No, but you'll be introduced to Bloom's taxonomy next week, and all that is a pyramid of critical thinking, and it has literal thinking on the bottom, and then it moves up to analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and so on. There's a few more categories there. And so what we're looking for in this class is for stimulating higher level critical thinking skills in order for students to obtain better academic achievement. And then we have critical theory, which has to do with a philosophical approach to culture and to literature. And what it does, it seeks to analyze and be introspective about historical and social justice issues and the different ideological forces that constrain or have constrained societies. This term is applied particularly to the work of the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School was a group of academics who came from Germany. After World War II, they escaped Germany from the Holocaust, and they decided that the world had just gotten too much into categorizing people. And they believe that people are best looked at as individuals, and thinking about people was best left to thinking about them as individuals. That's not to say that there aren't different socioeconomic groups and different racial groups. But we'll get to that later in the course. Critical pedagogy is a philosophy of education. It has to do with a social movement, and it comes from, its origins are in critical theory. What I just talked about, relating more to the individual than to categorizing groups of people. And the reason why categorizing groups of people was so hard for the Frankfurt School, or the academics of the Frankfurt School, was because most of them were Jewish and they had escaped the Holocaust. And that particular event categorized Jewish people very unfavorably. And I'm sure you know a lot about what happened, and it will be something you probably will come across in your teaching. And then there's critical race theory. Critical race theory is that controversial topic that takes critical theory and social justice issues and realizes that there has, and there probably will be for a long time, been systematic racism in American institutions and other country institutions also, but we're going to focus on just American ones. So welcome to the world of critical thinking. The quote is, "An unexamined life is not worth living," because they realize that many unexamined lives together result in an uncritical, unjust, and dangerous world. And Socrates said that. Excuse me. So here's a bit about critical theory, and when you get a chance, go ahead and read these two bullets. One's about oppression, especially socially and economically, that kind of oppression. And critical theory aims to provide an enlightenment about social justice, realizing that students can be agents of social change. And how would that involve your teaching in the classroom and the students learning in the classroom? Is they will analyze, using media literacy, just what organizations and institutions put out the academic curriculum that students will be learning. And also, they'll be free to question it. So now we're going to discuss a timeline of Western philosophers. Let me fix this. And we'll be discussing all of these. And if you notice that most of these men are men and they're white, but they had a lot of useful knowledge that we can take. Of course, there are African-American philosophers. There's philosophers from all around the world, and we'll be getting into some of those next week. But at this point, we're looking at classical Western philosophers. So the first one we're going to talk about is Socrates. And I'm going to take a minute to ask you to read what we have here about Socrates. By the way, he was the teacher of Aristotle. So what I do here is I give a little summary of the thoughts the Western philosophers had, and then I give a little application for you to evaluate about common beliefs. And one common belief that I've seen in the classroom is that the weather causes earthquakes. And with that kind of topic, you would probably find that out. Of course, you're probably familiar with the TPEs. Those are the teacher professional expectations. But I'm sorry, the teacher performance expectations. And it is the first one is to relate the curriculum you're teaching to the real world, and also to stimulate prior knowledge about it. And when it comes to prior knowledge about earthquakes, and the stimulating of it, say in the early grades, lower elementary grades, and even sometimes in high school, you'll find when you do that, some students will, when you ask about them, well, what causes earthquakes, they will say the weather. And at that point, you go, well, let's think about that for a minute. Why would the weather cause earthquakes? And then you would get some feedback from the students. And then you continue asking them questions. Say, where do earthquakes originate? And then you would get to the point that a point of defining the atmosphere and the crust of the Earth's surface and how they're different. And then finally, you'll get students to come around to realize that it's not the atmosphere that causes earthquakes, but it's the crust of the Earth's surface and the faults in that crust. Next, we move on to Plato, who was a student of Socrates. And, oh, by the way, Socrates was also responsible for Socratic thinking, which is that higher level questioning I was talking about a few minutes ago. So Plato was more of a social justice philosopher, and he examined humanity and found out that individuals develop according to his or her ability. So everybody has different abilities. And what you as a teacher want to do, and students as learners want to do, are recognize their ability. And it can be an ability in a certain subject, or these are the things you have to find out when you're teaching. And also their learning methods, such as interpersonal. Maybe they learn best in groups, which would be interpersonal learning, or maybe they learn best just by reading or individualized learning. In this sense, justice means excellence. So in order of striving for excellence with each student, you have to look at each student individually. That doesn't mean that you can't group them. Grouping them is perfectly acceptable. There's two kinds of groups. There's heterogeneous grouping and there's homogeneous grouping. And the heterogeneous grouping is where you mix up the different groups of students, say those who come to school without knowledge of English, with fluent speakers of both, say, Spanish and English, or Chinese and English. And that's heterogeneous grouping. And that way you're in a situation, and they are in a situation in a group where the English proficient and the first language proficient student will be able to help the English language learner. And today, right now, it is permitted for students to speak in their first language. So maybe they're in the groups and maybe you don't know their first language, and they're talking to each other in their first language. And they might find out by talking in their first language that even though one of them is fluent in English, the other one has higher academic achievement in their first language. And that has powerful meaning, because that means that higher academic knowledge will transfer from their second language to their first language. So Plato's was Socrates' students, as I said before. or maybe I didn't say that before, maybe I got it confused. And if so, I apologize. But Plato was Socrates' student, and he opened up a school in Athens, and it was the world's first college. And he too taught people how to critically think in an interdisciplinary way. So here is a classroom application for you to think about. What activities must teachers engage students in order to ensure that each of them develops to the best of his or her ability? So that's something for you to think about. Oh, what I had said before was something about Aristotle being Plato's teacher, I believe. And he was not. It was Socrates and Plato who worked together. And Plato was a student of Socrates. So I apologize for that error. So Aristotle, on the other hand, I'll give you a moment to read about that and reflect about what a syllogism is. Now, the reason I teach syllogisms, and I'm pretty ardent about this, is because they help you with research. Because actually what you're finding out, you're using logical reasoning to find out how one topic relates to another. For example, studies have shown that more engaged students achieve higher levels of academic achievement. So after you found a study, maybe in the National Library, proving that, then you could link academic engagement to the teaching of critical thinking skills so that they are discipline specific. In other words, critical thinking skills in science. Okay, so these discipline specific critical thinking skills in science, when they're enhanced, say you find out that they are enhanced when students are engaged in their learning. And you know what that means from UDL, engagement. So when students are engaged, before I had mentioned that academic achievement is linked to increased engagement. So therefore, you can say increased engagement enhances critical thinking skills in addition to academic achievement. And here's an example of a syllogism, so you can read through that. It's quite simple. Next, we come to, oh, sorry about that, Thomas Aquinas. Now, Thomas Aquinas heightened the awareness of reasoning and its power, and how reasoning needs to be questioned or cross-examined from another different point of view even. Aquinas' thinking also illustrates that those who think critically do not always reject established beliefs. Okay? They just believe that they are reasonable foundations for a concept or a theory. And be thinking about an example of that. Some established belief that you might have of the 2024 election, and say you reject it, and then you realize that the beliefs that you have rejected or not accepted you can prove that you don't accept them because they lack reasonable foundations. So what are some cooperative methods students can use to state, consider, and answer criticism? Okay, here we get into playing devil's advocate. And this is very important in critical thinking, especially in English when you write an argument paper. I'm sure that you probably have all written argument papers, and that's where you pose an argument and you argue on its behalf, and then you pose a counter argument to that argument and research maybe other people who were had those views, and then you find at the end if you are certain and can prove your argument through research and can disprove the counter argument through research, then your argument can be your rebuttal. Next is Francis Bacon. He was an interesting philosopher in that he wanted to study the world empirically. He thought that science was based on information gathering processes and analysis and evaluation. And he said that, say, when you're coming up with a hypothesis, your mind can trick you to thinking of an answer that may or may not be valid, or maybe is only partially valid. People can become trapped in their own conventional systems of thought. And that's where you need to teach students to question who the authors are and who the politicians are in terms of contrived conventional systems of thought. In other words, misinformation, like what they call fake news, being emphasized over and over again, that a lot of people become trapped in these conventional systems of thought. So our question for Francis Bacon is, what is an example of convention, linear thought, and thought that has you considering a number of sources, a number of viewpoints? And we'll look at that. So conventional thinking is a connection between problems and their causes. And they believe that it's easy to trace and things are easy to find out. Whereas systems thinking, the relationship between problems and their causes is indirect and not obvious, and possibly examining whether it's true or not. And then conventional thinking would be others, either within outside or within or outside on an organization, should be blamed for the problems that and that they are the ones that have to change. That's conventional thinking. I'm sure you recognize some of this in the political rhetoric between the two presidential candidates. And then systems thinking would be, excuse me, we unwittingly create our own problems, create our own problems. And we do have significant control or influence in solving them through changing our own behavior. And in order to help students and adults change their behavior, that's where the media literacy comes in. You have them actually analyze and synthesize the information they're getting to determine whether it is, and there's no black and white in this, whether it's accurate, whether maybe it's partially accurate, and that has a range of grays, or whether it's not accurate at all. Okay, so I can give an example of the not accurate at all is when you come across the belief that the Holocaust didn't happen. The Holocaust deniers. It absolutely happened. There's proof to it. And you can find all the letters and all the information from the German government at the National Library of Congress and also on other legitimate websites. They actually have pictures of the letters and tactile proof. And then, so I'll let you do the rest of these and think about them on your own. Next, we have Descartes. And go ahead and read about him. So what we have here is we kind of have, what do I want to say? An individualistic need to teach ourselves to guide our own thinking. And that's something that is very hard and challenging for students and for adults too. So, so what you need is to inform students and let them find out on their own what clarity of thinking is and what precise thinking is. I can give you an example on research about critical thinking. Researchers, sorry, researchers have found that critically thinking cannot be taught as a general subject. It needs to be related to an entity, and that entity should be subject specific. In other words, a subject specific discipline in would be social studies, critical thinking about social studies, or critical thinking about history. All right. So there, when you read about history, you have students become aware that they can question it. It's all right not to believe everything that you read. And it's all right to investigate a variety of opinions, a number of different sources, different websites from different countries, and then have students figure it out themselves. So this is Descartes again. Every part of thinking, Descartes argued, should be questioned, doubted, and tested. And then we have the famous I think, therefore I am. All right, what series of questions should you ask students to examine their thinking? I'll leave that for you to think about one at a time. All right, so what are these? These are basically, this is Socratic questioning. How you can question students, the way Socrates developed it, when you probe. Okay, say example, you're talking about solids and liquids and ice and water. And it's only you're in the lower elementary grades. They don't know, like first graders, kindergartners don't know about the states of matter. So what you have to do, since they're concrete thinkers, you have to show them what ice is, how it's made, as opposed to what water is and where it comes from. So all these are questions that you can look at, and then we'll move on. So next one I want to talk about quickly is Kant. I don't want to run out of time. He lived mostly in the 16th century. So he did critiques. He questioned all the ideas of reason, morality, religion, aesthetics. I came across that today. I was writing, I like to write, so I was writing an article for a social media site, and I was thinking about aesthetics and art. And so if you go and with a group of people and you look at the Mona Lisa, each person, if you ask them about it, they'll each have they'll each have opinions about it and what it means, and whether or not they're correct or not. Maybe some really experts on Leonardo da Vinci knew all the presumptions he had of what he wanted to do and why he wanted to do it in terms of painting that woman. And also critical thinking require who was the woman? How did Da Vinci know him? And then in teaching children, we must think in, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be reading this. Anyway, I'll have you read this yourself about your own teaching and how you communicate with your students in order to further their knowledge in speech. And this is also Kantian. Now, in order to further knowledge and speech, we have to remember something very important, which is a whole nother course and topic, is the teaching of standard language or standard English. And if you're in a situation where you're teaching Spanish, standard Spanish, okay? So you let students know that from the get-go, that in this class, we speak a language referred to as standard English, and even make a whole lesson out of it. And then let them know the difference between standard and non-standard English. Not that anyone is greater or anyone is better than the other. They both have their origins, and we can go into that in another time. All right, so I'm going to show you the rest of these, but all I want to focus on right now is the question: how would you handle well-meaning criticism from parents or the administration? And I want you to think about that. When I first taught, I have a funny story. The teacher said, Mr. Bamberg, well, she called me Matthew. Matthew, come here. So I come there. So we were talking. She goes, let's assume that I'm a parent, right? And then she goes on, let's assume that I'm ranting at you. And then maybe she goes on to role model the rant or the complaint she has, accusing me of this and that. And as she goes through this complaint and demonstrates it, she walks toward the door of the classroom, walks the parent out, and says, I really do hope you have a good night, and then shuts the door. That's something to think about. I don't know if I ever did that, but you can do part of that, and it would be perfectly appropriate in that if you are in some sort of conflict with a parent, you can just breathe, and then you can, have the parent continue to speak and listen, and then walk the parent, and you don't even have to respond. And you say, oh, well, I have another meeting soon, whatever you say. All right, John Dewey's important. because he was democracy. And he was a proponent of strong democracy. And that means all men are created equal. People vote. This is all John Dewey's work. And if you're going to talk about the political election, you will be talking about some of the things John Dewey had some very good ideas about. This is the most important one for this particular class and this particular series of classes. You are taking now ITI 680, and here you are going to accumulate information about a topic for a research study proposal that you can do in your own classroom. In other words, you think about the biggest challenge you would have teaching on that first day of school or throughout the year, and you focus on that, and then you do research on it and find solutions to, and some of the research questions I think I might be showing you here or in the next week. Some of those research questions have to do with specific critical thinking methods. And what you're going to do in this class is you are going to apply, say, let me talk about this one. Unique and complex in an effort to resist categorizing them. That's a good one. Okay, so here Adorno wants to talk about Native Americans. And this is perfect for that. Right? To be sure, they have common ancestors who were in the Americas before they came over from Spain. That would be a good example. Okay, so we're going to do this next week. And the most important, well, not the most, one of the most important philosopher here is from Brazil. It's Paulo Freire. And I want you to make sure that you read this slide. Let's put a little text box in here. You read this slide by next week before the Zoom meeting, which is the 10th. So please read to discuss in the week to Zoom meeting. So it would be by Tuesday, September 10th. All right, now we have a post-structuralism. So I want you to read through that, and we'll also discuss that next week, because I am running out of time, and it's as much as I can talk without having students here to talk with them, which also fills up sessions. So actually, I'm in a good place we're going to talk about the week 1 blog posts. There's more than one. So I want you to read these. Okay, so what all this is saying here is you're going to write a post to the initial prompt of 250 words by Thursday, this week and every week. And then by the following Saturday, you're going to respond in 250 words to one of your colleagues or classmates or peers by Saturday. Okay, So 2 posts. One, responding to the initial prompt, and 2, responding to another student or me. Week 1 blog prompt is, how will individual life maps developed by students impact your thoughts and feelings they have about themselves? How will they help you to understand biases and who your students are? Okay, so what is a life map? I would suppose somebody by now, if someone was here, would say, oh, a life map is a map of your life. And that's exactly what it is. And you're going to see more about what the assignment is and how a life map is done for your life, because it's a total creative process, and it's a process that you need to put in multimedia, whether it be PowerPoint or try to stay away from documents, because it's just not really a good way to present yourself if you are giving a talk to students or to your colleagues. So, life maps. Let's go on to the assignment now. Week 1 assignment. Create a timeline. Doesn't have to be a timeline. It can be a Canva presentation or anyone that you choose off any platform that you choose off the internet. And I suggest you, at this point, I didn't say in the blog. Let's go to the blog. Please. And I should have written this in there, but it's never too late. Please use your subscribed National University Grammarly account to to revise your posts. Once you have Grammarly installed, it will automatically work inside all discussion. What do you call those? Threads. Okay. So that's very important. And you know what? I'm going to put that in italics so I can distinguish it from the directions. So let's go back to the directions. So you're going to have a life map. And if you look at the instructions, you'll find an example of how you would go about this. Okay, if I were to do a life map, my life is a lot longer than most of yours, believe me. If I were to do a life map, I'd talk about my college years and then what I did after college, went to graduate school, and then I would talk about, high school. And before that, I would start out with my youth. Okay. I had an interesting family. My father was a World War II vet. He actually was a bombardier. I don't even know how you say that, but he was a pilot, and he also released the bombs. And I just found that out off ancestry.com. You can use that if you want for this assignment. And I found out that my father was a bombardier just a year ago. And I was actually shocked. The article was in the Miami Herald. I'm from Miami. And it was a small little clip saying my father was off, Harold Bamberg was off to bombardier school in New Mexico. My father never mentioned a word about it. He never talked about the war, except I know he had one leg shorter than the other. But anyway, these are the type of things you can include in a life map along with how they affected you. So that should help you explain the life map. It's funny because when I was in graduate school, I was in creative arts education, and we had to do a performance about our life. And we had to have a place where we were going to do this performance. We had to have dialogue or it wasn't PowerPoint. It was like using your environment to describe the years of your life. So I was smart enough to have everybody come to the locker room where the lockers are numbered. And since it was creative arts, I had a little model of each year I could remember of my life. Like, for example, when I was 2, I almost drowned, and I represented that. And you can use your visual imagination to figure out what I did. Anyway, that's all for tonight. That life map. If you have any questions, you can call me at 760-835-2617, or you can email me at mbamberg@nu.edu. And I misspelled university, didn't I? You just saw that. You just saw Grammarly at work. All right. Good night, everybody.